Hello.
There we go. You're on.
All right. Good evening, and welcome to this conversation with Michael Apted. I'm Leslie Woodhead, and I should declare my interest straight away. Michael and I have been chums since the early 60s, when we both had the improbable good fortune of being production trainees at Granada TV in Manchester. Michael quickly graduated to directing TV dramas, ranging from Coronation Street to Harold Pinter, before going into feature films in the early 70s, directing 2 movies for David Putnam. In 1980, he went to Hollywood, where over the past 30 years, he's become one of the most prolific British directors of his generation. His films, which often have a strong social and ethical themes and regularly feature powerful women, have gained Academy Award nominations and include Coal Miner's Daughter, Gorillas in the Mist, Enigma, and the Bond film, The World Is Not Enough. Michael has also made a range of cinema documentaries, from a memorable film with Sting to a harrowing documentary about the survivors of Tiananmen Square. We'll be talking later about the borderland between documentary and drama, which has been an intriguing territory for both of us over the years. But first, 56 Up, the latest film in Michael's extraordinary Up documentary series. Since the first film in 7 Up in 1964, he's followed the stories of those 14 kids every 7 years. And the series has become a defining obsession of his professional life. The Up films have been called one of the great imaginative leaps in film. And I've been telling him for years that the Ups will finish on his headstone, whether he likes it or not. So, Michael, how did it begin for you as a raw graduate trainee at Granada in the early 60s?
Yeah, I went to Granada in 1963. They were recruiting raw talent, as it were, from the universities and whatever. Before that, Granada had you were on a course before
Just before you, yeah.
But generally, Granada had poached from the BBC, from the theatre, from journalism, and they were trying to create a whole generation of television program makers. Yeah. But the problem, the good and the bad news, was they didn't really have the resources to train us. So training started out as watching people, and then it became on the job, which is occasionally catastrophic. But one of my first jobs with a colleague, another trainee, Gordon McDougall, who was to go on to become an important theatre director, we were dragged out and sent off to meet a Canadian director, Paul Armand, who was under a short-term contract at Granada doing a Tennessee Williams play. And our job was to recruit some 7-year-olds to make a documentary about the English social system.
So that was defined from the outset?
It was defined. It was very crudely defined. Tim Hewitt, whose brainchild it was, who was a great Australian journalist who really changed the whole face of current affairs in television. His notion was you put a camera on the top of Golden Square, which is where the London offices were, and you put 20 children down there, you say 5 step forward, and you say those 5 will have successful lives, the rest of the 15 won't. It will depend on where you've come from.
Where you come from?
In terms of your social background.
Oh, right, your education.
Yeah, your education. So anyway, we took that great central idea and refined it somewhat, because Paul was a terrific director and wanted to make an artistic film about 7-year-olds, and I think Gordon and I were more tuned into the kind of what we thought the social inequality of England was. And so there it was. It was going to be a one-off film, and we made it. We found the children in 3 weeks, shot it in about 3 weeks, and then eventually it went on the air and was a huge success because it was ingenuous, it was sweet and innocent. Out of the mouths of these babes came these startling truths about the English system. So that's how it started.
That's amazing, because it was it was much more elegant and artful and well crafted than your average World in Action, which were usually just bash you in the face with a bunch of statistics and consider these facts. And that was it.
Yeah, exactly.
But even now it looks pretty good, actually, in film terms.
And, you know, what was sort of embarrassing looking back on it, the penny never dropped about what we should do until 5 years after the first one had come out.
That's what I was going to ask you. When did it seem a good idea to go on?
I never forget it. I was sat in the commissary at Granada, and Dennis Foreman, because the Dennis Foreman who was running Granada, came and sat by me, which was shocking in itself. And he said, have we ever thought about going back? I said, no. So well, wouldn't that be quite a good idea? So I thought, okay, yeah. And he said, would you do it? Because I was still at Granada and Paul had long gone. And so we did it. And it was a bit horrific. It was a bit spotty. I mean, when I say spotty, the participants were spotty. Mm-hmm. And it was a bit monosyllabic and grumpy, but you could see, I think, immediately the beginnings of a big idea.
Because as announced on the over the end credits of 7-Up, the thought was you might pop back in the year 2000 to see
Correct.
What had happened.
So that idea had been placed in the mind, but that was so far away that it seemed inconceivable. But once we'd done 7+7, then we were off and running.
Okay, well, what I suggest is that we look at the first clip, which is from 56 Up, and gives us a sense of how the no longer kids feel about having been part of this grand venture. Let's go.
What do you think about making this program?
I just think it's just ridiculous. I wouldn't think I'm doing it.
Why is it that we are so annoyed about this program?
I think the problem I have is that you don't get a very rounded picture. You get the odd comment that comes out on a particular topic, but because of the time restraint that this programme obviously has, otherwise we'd be on for a couple of months if you were trying to get everybody's real thoughts on things.
It's just that the limitations of such things as what the audience requires and the time don't allow it to be a real study.
I think I'd like to say this and I'd like to say that, and then they film me sort of doing all this daft stuff, and it goes on, 7 days out of every 7 years. It's sort of biblical something or other, and it's all this excitement and so on, and then they present this tiny little snippet of your life, and it's like, that's all there is to me.
When I go home, I go and see my mother, and I have tea and watch TV. And then I do my homework, and I go and see my father.
Were they in the 60s trying to say that the fact that I'd supposedly had a more privileged upbringing, that I should have been the one who'd become the high flyer, and that
Absolutely.
You having come from, I just think that's so wrong, but is that what they were trying to get at?
The idea of looking at a bunch of people over time and how they evolve, that was a really nifty idea. It isn't a picture really of the essence of Nick or Susie. It's a picture of everyone. It's how a person, any person, how they change. Just seeing me this age and the next age with more wrinkles and more...
I think we have all got a few of those.
Oops.
Oops.
It's not an absolute accurate picture of me, but it's a picture of somebody. And that's the value of it.
But then we're putting ourselves out to be that person.
Well, I didn't want to do it when I was 14. I know I was very difficult. I was very anti doing it. I was pressurised into doing it by my parents. And I hated it. And I vowed I'd never do it now. But here I am.
Who knows in 7 years whether it'll be done again, but this is me saying hopefully I'll reach my half century next year and I shall bow out. I don't know what happened. I was quite adamant I wasn't going to do it. And then, I don't know, I suppose I have this ridiculous sense of loyalty to it, even though I hate it. And that's just such a contradiction, isn't it? And also I think it's like reading a bad book. I'll still read it, I'll still see it through. And I guess I'll put this down to being a bad book, but I'll see it through.
That's absolutely fascinating, I think, and very astute. How do you respond to those fairly unwelcome charges?
Well, I mean, we've lived with it. Claire Lewis, who's here, who's worked with me since 28. Good Lord. We have to live with that because a lot of them really don't like doing it, don't enjoy doing it. Most of them, even if they like it, pretend they don't. And, so it's just a question of constantly wooing them, particularly Susie, who is very, very important. We didn't have enough women in the film from the very beginning, which was, I don't take blame for that. I take the fact that England and Great Britain in 1964, the idea of women running the country in the year 2000 was out of the question.
Can't imagine.
But, it caught up with us pretty quickly, so we were stranded, and she is very important because she was the only one who comes sort of middle, upper class. But, she's given us a runaround for generations.
But she's still there.
Yeah, and I've had entirely memorable experiences with her. I mean, she'd agree to do it, then we'd show up, and then she'd throw a hissy fit and whatever, and then we'd sit, and I never forget 49 Up. We were sat interviewing her, and I wasn't getting anywhere with her at all. And George, who's also here tonight, who's our great cameraman who's been with us forever, since 21, George? Correct. He started saying, sort of giving me nudges and things like that, and this went on and on. And I said, all right, let's stop this. George, come out, sit here, and I'll go and sit behind the camera and shoot the thing. And that's what we did. That's
George asked the questions?
Yes, George did the interview. So you have to kind of think on your feet a bit doing this stuff. But, I mean, on the other hand, I think they do have, as Susie says, a sort of a loyalty to the thing and, appreciation to the thing. And I think, first of all, we pay them. We've paid them since 28, and I decided this time that I would pay them a bit more than we paid them before because times are hard. So that helped it a little bit. But I think the thing that is most significant about 56, which is clearly represented in that clip you see, was that there's a sense of empowerment of them. It was their idea to do it together.
Yeah.
She didn't want to do it on her own. It was going to be the same old story. And she said, and she and Nick had formed a kind of email relationship. He lives in Wisconsin. And they made this plot. And they presented with this plot. And I was kind of slightly shocked and upset. Why wouldn't she want to be interviewed by me, as it were? But anyway, we went along with it, and I think it, paid huge dividends for us.
I agree.
Put her at ease and everything.
I mean, so they've really, to a degree, taken ownership of the film.
Yeah. I mean, it's been obvious for many generations of it, the way the thing has changed, that I'm 15 years older than them, and for the first few films it was a huge abyss, the age difference. And then it started to get smaller and smaller. The films became more emotional. They became quite hard work to do because, we were so bonded. And then over these last two, then they've sort of taken it over and said, we want to do this, we want to do that, why can't we do it this way, we want to shoot it here and all that, which is really exactly what needed to happen. I mean, not that I ever planned it like that. Everything has been organic because, my whole theory of doing this film, which I've learned painfully over the years, is that I have to be a blank slate. I daren't go in with predictions or preempting things or remembering what they did in 49 or once before, whether they pick up the same thing. We have to give a totally honest, as much as we can, snapshot of their lives at this point in time. Because I got caught out a couple of times by anticipating what might happen down the road and getting it completely wrong and embarrassing myself.
But you're sometimes reasonably tough with them. I mean, there's an extraordinary moment in the 56 where you suggest to Tony that he might be a racist, which he doesn't take kindly.
He didn't, no, and it's an awkward moment for us. I mean, that's the one thing in this film that we've been slightly beaten up for, and looking back at it, we did it wrong because this has been an issue for some time with Tony.
That's it.
The East End for the last 2 or 3 films, and maybe I should have put it in a historical context rather than throw it out at them. But yes, I mean, and they understand that. And I mean, Claire and I have a kind of good cop, bad cop relationship in a sense, because Claire lives here in the United Kingdom and she sort of nurtures them in the intervening years.
Right.
I live in America and I come over and sometimes we all get together. But she does, we know that I've got to go for it, you know, in these interviews and whatever, and she's the one that picks up the pieces, and it seems to work okay.
Well, I'd like to pick up on that. I'd be interested to know what your working process is. How do you set about it? We're coming up, it's year 6 is coming to an end, you've got 6 months to do it. How does it work?
Well, we reverse engineer it. We find out when ITV, and Granada, which is the reason that I'm here now, is because they've supported it through all these generations with never a blink, frankly. So we find out when they want to broadcast it. We know it's the 7th year, then we work backwards. But in some ways, the big preparation is simply figuring out, we'll have, say, a month to shoot it, who can we do where? The actual substance of the thing, we know what's going on in their lives, the headlines of their lives, for example. But we have no real idea psychologically what's going on. And I never prepare for it. I just sit down with them and we do these long interviews, maybe 1 or 2, and they don't know what I'm going to ask.
So you sit down without prepared questions at all?
And we just talk about what they want to talk about.
Right.
And, you know, for example, this one, those who've seen it, Neil presented me with a kind of referendum or something, or whatever. He said, I've got to put the record straight on all this. So I do that. I go with whatever they say, and again, knowing in some ways the big issues of their life, I deal with that and what are the biggest historical issues. But I don't prepare anything. I don't go in with a list of questions. And then Claire is watching, and if stuff is missed out, then she'll correct me on it. But basically, because I have this theory when I was doing it when I was younger, you know, the car floor thing. You travel with someone in a car, you practice the interview, and they do these great things. And then you come to shoot, and you say, and they do it terrible. And then you say, remember when you were in the car, you said this, and that's hopeless.
That does never
You
work.
only ever get one shot at it.
Yeah. And then having acquired the presumably quite long interviews from 14 people, where do you go from there?
I go to Kim Horton.
That would be
Dr.
a good idea.
Horton, who's also here, who's our great editor. No, I mean, then, you know, the real tough stuff goes. And it's a complicated question to answer, because when I never really knew what this film was about.
This one, the 56,
until I sat in a group of people and watched it. Because you never quite know what the vibration is going to be from them, and it's a kind of cumulative thing. I think Claire and I thought this film might be depressing. They got to 56, they were thinking of retirement, the economic situation is tough, maybe the children, the grandchildren, how will they be supported and all this. So we were sort of ready for a fairly tough thing.
Are you saying you were still thinking that even after you'd shot the interviews, you wouldn't know how they'd shape up?
Really, yeah. And then, of course, when it came out, when we put it all together, it had this tremendous optimism about it. Even we knew characters that are central to us, like Jackie, who'd had a miserable time in a kind of objective sense. People are dying all over the place. And yet she says, you know, my cup is half full, not half empty, and all that. She's always said that to me. But you look at the film, and I think why this was a fairly successful one, it had a kind of optimism to it, and a kind of comfort, you know, that people have coped, and people are coping, and people are in solid relationships. And these are very powerful things that overcome some of the political stuff that's being thrown at us.
Yeah, I think you speak about the heroism of ordinary life, and it certainly it conveys that very, very strongly. That's fascinating, though, that even until you sat down with other folk and just sat back and looked at it, it wasn't obvious to you that that was the theme.
No, it becomes obvious to Kim and I what the shape of each show should be, because, again, each generation has to stand for itself. So 56 has to be a film which is a piece of drama in a way. You know, that whatever is the key to this character we have to build towards it, whether it's Sue from the East End, who's now got a huge job at the University College of London, law school, as it were, who regularly stands up in front of an audience of 600 people, a girl who had barely any education and never went to university. So she seemed to be one of the great successes, so her story had to build to that.
Right.
The other parts for life were secondary, and in another way, Tony sort of shaped itself because of the amazing coincidence at the Greyhound track where we
Right,
filmed
it's
in
an Olympic stadium.
At 21, at 40, at 42 is the Olympic Stadium. But we try and shape it, and then we have to, once we've shaped it and we get the idea of what the story is, the drama of it, because I have to feed information into the audience gradually.
Well, we'll talk about that in a minute when we get, I mean, I'm personally extremely interested in this, as I said, borderland between drama and documentary, and what we both feel it takes to make an effective documentary, which for some purists might seem unbearably constructed.
Yeah. And then, having got that, then we have to graft in all the archival stuff, you know, which is sometimes painful. I reckon that we probably chuck out 80% of what we shot the generation before, so 80% of 49 went out the window. And it's always a battle. Do you go for the current big moment, or do you go for the past? And we always have to kind of kick ourselves and remember that's our ace in the hand, which is the past. That's the one thing that we've got that no one else has got.
Right.
We can go back into these people's lives and see where these things came from what small oak this acorn grew.
Right.
So, and some of these are so iconic, some of these, I mean, that's what the audience expectation is. So I have to honour that, even if it means not using stuff that I think is terrific for now.
They want to see, I want to be an astronaut.
Exactly,
they want to see, you know, all those unforgettable lines from the kids.
So I think that's sort of the process, and then just trying it out on people to see how people respond to it.
And you do a lot of trying it out.
Yeah, even if it's only 3 or 4 people,
right,
because we get kind of so bogged down in it.
Yeah. I mean, I'm fascinated by, I looked through them all again over the last few days, how immensely bold in a way structurally they are. You're utterly unimprisoned by the chronology.
Yeah.
You're happy to fire across the decades without turning a hair, which seems to work.
Yeah, because I think that's what makes this unique, and we can use it. And I mean, Kim is great. He did a whole pass going through all of them, just putting in archive, and even if it was only an image, just to do those little generational things, even if something else was being talked about.
Right.
You know, and I said it's painful because we shoot a lot of stuff. We have a lot of stuff we think is good, and the film can't contain it all, because what I like to do is this is made for television, for Granada, for ITV, and it always comes out here, but then it has a life after this as a single film.
In America?
All everywhere. I mean, it's sold as a single film, especially in all the English-speaking countries, and in America, and it sometimes gets theatrical distribution, always in America, and then it goes on other television, other nations. So it always obviously goes on as a single film.
I mean, it's fascinating. I know it's enjoyed kind of a phenomenal success in the United States, where you might think the preoccupations of the English class system might not strike a chord in every bosom.
Well, that was the big epiphany I had, which, again, the whole process has been vaguely unconscious, how we've got to where we are. I remember I'd gone to live in America after 21, and people were asking me, what was this thing you were doing, this 28 thing? And I explained it to them, and they said, we'd love to see it. I said, no, you can't see it. And they said, why? I said, because A, it's very dear to me, and you won't understand it. How can an American sit there and understand comprehensive school, private school, public schools, and all this kind of stuff? They won't understand the English class system, and I couldn't bear to sit with an audience of people looking blankly at the screen. But anyway, they prevailed upon me, and I showed it to them, and of course they got it. And that, for me, was an epiphany. I realized I was making a completely different film from what I thought I was doing. I thought I was still carrying on the legacy of 7 Up, which is the whole kind of, that strong social framework that we have. But the film had left that far behind, and now the film was about these characters and their environments and their interplay and all the things going back to the heroism of the ordinary life.
Yeah.
The things that everybody has to deal with, and it was about that, and that's universal.
I guess it's gathered the qualities of a great Victorian novel in some way.
Yeah, it's...
I mean, like Middlemarch or something. Yeah. I mean, that is kind of unexpected, that it would gather this bigger momentum, this bigger meaning, as it went forward.
Yeah, and when people ask me about the film, is England like that? Is the United Kingdom like this? And I said, well, only in a very narrow sense. It's these people who were born in 1956, and this is the social system they were born into, and this is, if you want, the damage the social systems did to their opportunities or the gifts the social system. But had I started the film 5, 10, 15 years later, it would be quite different.
Yeah, entirely.
So although it's a very strong underlying theme in the whole thing and will never go away, it isn't about that anymore.
That's fascinating. So you obviously feel... When do you think it transformed itself? When did that begin to happen?
I think 28 was a crucial film because I think, 7, 14, 21, there was a kind of cockiness about the whole thing. At 28, people are in what I call the bathwater of life. They'd made choices, their options are closing down, they were married, they had children, they got jobs and this, and there was a kind of gravitas about it, and which made looking back into their roots kind of intriguing. But I think that was the turning point, and I think I was lucky that I didn't show the film into other marketplaces until 28.
Yeah,
that was the first one that was ever shown abroad. I think that was the turning point.
Yeah, by that time it really had a universality that could work for everybody. Actually.
And I think Claire and I knew more what we were doing. We weren't harbouring on old things. We were into. It was kind of a kind of just uplifting experience for me to know that I could focus entirely on Karen. I didn't have to worry about keeping this class story going all the time. A little of that goes a very long way, and it's clearly there.
How do you respond to the accusation is much too strong, but the reservations that Nick and Susie expressed in that clip about feeling, misrepresented? That's putting it too strongly, but that you pluck bits out of their life and weave them into this seductive thing but it's not quite them.
No, well, it's totally fair when you think of what I put them through in terms of the time they give me and the amount of babble I talk at them and all this sort of thing. And they look and they think, oh my God, that's all there is.
Yeah.
But on the whole, no one's left the film because of the way they've been treated.
Well, only one person had left,
Well, 2, and I got one back. 2 had left, but it wasn't because of the way we treated. That was Peter from Liverpool, because he got such a horrible press after 28.
I remember that, yeah.
Stuff this for a bowl of cherries, you thought. But Charles left at 21 to become a documentary filmmaker.
Well, that speaks volumes, yes.
I know. He'll never come back, largely because I was so angry with him I could not contain myself. And he's never forgiven me for that. But people have never left the film because we misrepresented them. People have drifted in and out. But usually because some crisis in their life that they just simply can't face sitting down and explaining or even having to bring it up. So I don't think they complain about what we show. They just complain there's not enough of it.
Yeah, I think that's right. But then what documentary ever has been able adequately to reflect
and I always
the
try
variety of material?
Because I want it to end up as a single film, I always try and keep it to 135 minutes. I don't allow it to expand, which I think is a good discipline for us. Otherwise the thing will just... Because it's pretty intense stuff. And I think it can be like being hit by a truck, and you can't really sit through much of that without getting agitated.
No, I think the way you play them now as 3 1 hours is probably the right way to go.
Yeah, that's good. This is the first time we've done that, but because they gave us, which was wonderful, a prime time slot.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
They gave us 9 till 10, so we had to do it in 3 1 hours.
Well, I benefited myself from ITV's astonishing new boldness in playing challenging material in prime time. That's wonderful.
Well, that was the kind of thing that we wanted to talk about a bit.
Yeah.
I.e., that you deal with pure documentary stuff and have to make it drama.
Yeah.
I'm doing the same thing too, and making it into dramatic things. And what is the process of that, and what is the challenge and the ethics and all that. So why don't we
look at the next clip, if we may. This is from my film, not Michael's actually, about it's called The Hunt for Bin Laden, and it's about the shenanigans that went on, particularly inside the American security services, FBI, CIA, and the crazy turf wars that made that thing last for 20 years. But why we talked about showing it is that in a sense, it it exposes exactly the same issues Michael's been talking about in terms of making some fairly intractable material into a receivable narrative, while hopefully preserving all the integrities about it. It's a bit of a challenge with a thing as forbidding as Bin Laden, but let's have a look at this anyway.
Suicide bombers attacked the USS Cole, an American destroyer in Aden Harbor. "17 sailors are killed and 39 injured."
We can see the African embassy bombings and the Cole as opening acts of a very bad play that occurs on 9/11.
An FBI team is sent out to investigate, led by Ali Soufan.
You smelled death, literally. Bodies were still wrapped in the metal. The explosion created such a force that the floor literally folded like a carpet. And many of the sailors were still trapped.
If you look who we sent in to look at the aftermath of the Cole, a heavy FBI presence, and this is a crime. We didn't view that as a war. If we'd viewed it as a war, we'd probably had a different approach and a response.
What was the military response to Mogadishu? We pulled out. What was the military response to Nairobi and Dar es Salaam? We fired a couple of cruise missiles and killed a couple of bums on the ground. Nobody important. What was the military response to the Cole? None. None. Zero. That was an act of war. Bin Laden had declared war on the United States in August of 1996. And he meant it. And we knew, the ones that worked on it knew that he meant it. And nobody else believed us. But after the Cole, they didn't believe us. They treated the Cole like somebody had done a carjacking.
The Cole was a quagmire because it involved a tremendous commingling of agencies in the U.S. government having their own little battle. Information sharing, compartmentalization, turf, rules, all this shit went into play.
Working inside the CIA and FBI joint operation to hunt down Bin Laden, Mark Rossini is shocked to find that investigations are becoming entangled in bureaucratic reluctance to share information between agencies. He gets a phone call from FBI colleague Ali Soufan, who's in Aden alongside the USS Cole.
He's in the water next to the freaking boat with a hole in it. And he calls me, and I'm at my desk, and he says, "Hey Mark, what do you have on so-and-so?"
Rossini gives his colleague information about a suspect, being careful to conceal details which might be intercepted.
I get a tap on my shoulder. I had passed CIA information on an undisclosed line to the FBI without authorization. And they wanted to remove me from the building that moment, escort me out of the building, take my clearances away, now I'd be taken out of the building. I'm calling an FBI agent in the field, you fucking asshole, who's investigating an attack. And you want to shove the rules up my ass?
There's a reason for these turf wars, which goes beyond professional rivalry. It's known as the Wall, an American law that prohibits the passing of information collected by the CIA in foreign operations to the FBI, whose role is to build a case on evidence that can be brought before a US court.
Then they made me sign a document that said I cannot tell the FBI anything about what I learned in the CIA without written, explicit permission from the CIA. I could not utter it. I could not email it. I cannot even say that passing conversation, anything I learned at the CIA when I was working there.
Okay. I mean, what the reason why I was intrigued to use that is just the power of the witnesses. I mean, the defining purpose of these films, this one and the companion piece I made for the 10th anniversary of 9/11, is that there will only be interviews and archive, nothing else at all, which is both scary and very kind of exhilarating in a way. But I'm fascinated looking at that now, how what you were saying, Michael, about the need to discover the narrative, even in material as congested and complicated as that, is what I think I come to work for in the morning. And it's actually very, very difficult. And like you, I had no idea what this was about until we sat down and started to assemble it. It's not something you sit down and say, okay, this is how we'll do this. And that's intriguing because of how it, again, comes down to applying to documentaries some of the criteria that more naturally belong to narrative fiction. I don't know how you feel about that. But.
Well, yeah, I mean, because I work in both movies and documentaries, it's at the centre of my working life. And, I had the opportunity to do a film about a documentary and a movie about the same subject.
That's great.
We were going to show it, but I don't think we will, but because I can just summarise.
Well, we could show.
Well, no, I think because we want to do some 56 up questions.
Yeah.
But, doing it was about the Native American movement in the 70s and 80s, and I was doing a documentary about it. How the story was simply about how Nixon was trying to emasculate the American Indian movement by dividing them, what they had learned in Vietnam between the full bloods and the mixed bloods. And I was doing this documentary, then this script landed on my desk, and it was exactly the same story done as a movie. And so I did them, obviously I did them both, but it was so interesting just to compare the power and the weakness of both mediums. I mean, the power of a documentary is its visceral quality. You're looking at stuff for the first time. Its weakness is it can be very sloppy, very flabby and all this sort of stuff. The power of a movie, if it's a successful movie, is how complicated it can be. How complex you can make it, how you can shade it in a way that a documentary can't be shaded. On the other hand, it doesn't have quite that life that the documentary has. It doesn't have that attack, looking someone in the eyes for the first time.
Did it, yeah.
Did it. And, I've always carried that with me. I mean, my soul is that of a documentarian. Whenever I do a movie, even if it's something as fantastical as a Bond. I mean, the Bond I did was about getting gas out of the Caspian. So I insisted on, we all went down to the Caspian to see how they did it and what was going on. And we came back with some astonishing images, which were, not only did I shoot some of the movie in Azerbaijan, but, we built some of the sets based on what was down there. So, again, it was just feeding. I look at stuff from everything I do from a documentarian's point of view, whereas other, movie directors would look at it from a kind of figuring out a kind of imaginative point of view, if you know what I mean. I mean, having wonderful ideas or doing like that, but it's just the power of the documentary which, really started with 7-Up and all this sort of thing.
That's fascinating, actually, that we both come from a very factoid tradition. I mean, Granada was defined by documentaries of various kinds. I know I've never lost it, but it's surprising that you still feel it beats below your waterline, even after all these years.
And it served me well. I mean, I went to America, and the first film I did was The Coal Miner's Daughter.
Of course, yeah.
Which, was really another documentary film. I mean, I insisted on shooting it out there. Well, that was no big deal. They were ready for that. Only 3 people in the film had ever acted before. Sissy Spacek, Tommy Lee Jones, and Beverly D'Angelo. Everyone else was from locally, all the music. It was Livon Helm's film debut and all that sort of stuff. And I insisted that they sang the music live, which sent the studio into apoplexy.
Paroxysms,
Yes, I mean, it wasn't like we were in, a nice place. We were stuck in the middle of Appalachian Mountains with a 12-track recording thing, doing the thing. So, I mean, I was very lucky. I mean, I pulled it off, and, you know, the film had a kind of authenticity which Hollywood had never been able to figure out about the Appalachians and white trash, whatever you call it, and country music. Even great films like Nashville, you know, had a very patronizing attitude to the people. So, you know, and that was a bit of a landmark for me, that film, and all the things I learned at the, you know, at the knees of Ken Loach, the BBC, on Play for Today and Kes and all that sort of thing.
Didn't we all? Yes.
You know, I was able to put that into play, and it happened to be accidental because the material fitted perfectly into that approach, especially as Americans were very, you know, bigoted about that part of the world. I mean, they sneer at it, look down at it, you know, whereas I didn't, because I didn't know anything about it. I never heard of Loretta Lynn. My mother-in-law had, but that was the end of it. But, you know, as I said, this documentary route I have, which has, and the Up films have sustained it, you know, all the time. It always, I mean, I make other ones, but that's the kind of core of me, in a sense.
I completely understand and sympathise.
It really does influence everything I do.
Are there those who've said, that's all very well, but I mean, I remember when we started a drama documentary unit at Granada in the late 70s, our logo was, "We make boring plays." And the critics said, yeah, you really do. Which was not, you know, was not great, but our view was that if there was a conflict between journalistic values and documentary ones, the journalism had to win. Well, that was a much more stillborn version than anything that you found yourself saddled with. But it is until we were sitting here, I had no idea that pulse was so important for you.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
And you think it came out of 7-Up originally?
Well, yeah, it came out of Granada and doing documentaries, and, you know, I had a parallel career at Granada because it was small and you could do, you know, you could move around. I remember I was doing World in Action, current affairs, local news, and one of my closest friends was on the course with me, Mike Newell, and he was doing Coronation Street and he went on holiday. So I went up to the management, and I'm a fairly shy person, I'm not, well, maybe I'm not. But I went up and said, could I do Newell's Coronation Streets while he's on holiday? And
Had you done any studio drama? That was a fairly brave thing to say.
And they said, oh, all right.
Yeah, they did
so. And I did all right. And then I had to go back to local news and World in Action and whatever. But then, you know, that I had that taste for it. And so a few months later, they said, do you want to go back? And for me, that was the beginning of this dual career. I did 9 months on the street.
I mean, that thing of Granada's, do you want to try this, is something that formed both of our lives.
Yeah,
I mean,
we
just
were
the
so
moment
lucky,
when I thought I was utterly committed to documentaries, they suddenly said, why don't you do some drama?
Yeah.
I did Jim Allen and, you know, and Arthur Hopcroft and all of that. So extraordinary. Things are rather more compartmentalised now, I think, which is a
Shall we
pity.
field some
Let's do some questions. Who's got something to ask about the 7-Up 56?
We've got a microphone somewhere, so.
Yeah, a mic is hurtling towards you. All right, we've got quarter of an hour. There you go.
Hi, well, first of all, I'd like to thank you for the fact that in the years that I taught sociology for 15 years, you featured every week. And so my position is informed by your passion. But I think looking at it as a longitudinal survey and how much that means sociologically, that if you've got 80% that may or may not be on the cutting room floor, I'm saying, have you still got the 80%? Because I think that one of the interesting things to do would be for other people, like the notion of only the viewer sees, to sort of actually look at that material and see if there are other things people would like to glean from it, rather than, because it's got a life form of its own.
Well, that's very sensible, and it's a good idea, but there is a drawback to it. We do have everything, I think, since 21. I don't think the offcuts from 7 and 14 were kept.
Probably not. Yeah.
You know, we have to respect what the participants want, and some of the things that they say they're not happy about, and whatever, you know, some of the things I'm not happy about the way they say it. Whether one wants to open that up to the general public, I don't know. And I think they would have to give permission. I mean, they have a different attitude. Each one of them has a different attitude towards the end product. Some of them see it at a rough cut and give me notes, and others never bother to see it till it goes out. But they've all got an implicit right to look at it and to in a sense, edit it, because, you know, the burden of the longitudinal filmmaker is you can't piss them off because you want them to come back.
You want to go back again.
I mean, I'm sure both of us have done documentaries when you've lied to people to get them to say things, saying, of course I'll never use that, how would you think that? And you do. That's that. It's gone out there, and whatever damage you wanted to do is done. But with a longitudinal thing, you can't do that. So I think it's an idea that's, you know, bouncing around, but we always go back to they would have to sign off on it before we could release all the stuff. The idea is great.
Somebody else? Yeah, right. Mike, coming towards you.
Hi. Excuse me. You mentioned in passing that you as the director are something of a blank slate when you were directing the Up series. Would you hold that as a general principle for documentary filmmaking, or is that something unique to your style?
Well, I think it's what sort of documentary you're doing. You know, I mean, I've done, like the Native American one, I had a simple agenda. You know, I wanted to embarrass the FBI by what they'd done, and so I had to have the whole thing carefully sought out. I mean, I invited the FBI to be in the film, but when they didn't respond, I didn't pursue it. I'm just talking about things, you know, to do with character and whatever. But I think I'm in a unique position because, you know, I can blab about having a blank slate, but of course I have their whole lives in my brain. So I use that kind of metaphor in a sense with caution. I don't think you should all show up and say, what are we going to talk about now? And you wouldn't do it anyway. But I think just particularly for this, because I made mistakes, you know, for example, in 21, I was convinced Tony was going to end up in prison, that I would be filming him in Parkhurst or somewhere at 28. And so I took him all around London, and he showed me in his cab, showed me all where the Crays were and where Jack the Hat was killed and all this sort of stuff. And, you know, it went out and all this, and then, you know, he didn't. And it was sort of embarrassing. But he was gracious and said, don't judge a book by its cover, Michael.
Did he know what you were about while you were doing it?
Well, I'm not sure he did. No, I think he was kind of gleefully showing me around the East End. So I had an agenda, you know, because I was preparing for the next film. So I could do a nice intercut between him behind bars and him doing all this. I could see it there. You know, and it was, not only was it wrong, but it was just foolish. And so, you know, and also I got, you know, over my working life, the more I do, I suppose, it makes me think about myself doing these films. You know, the more I try and identify, you know, who I am, what my prejudices are, what my ambitions are, what do I think is success and what do I think is failure and all that sort of stuff, which is not what other people might think. Success to me would be a career and money and all that. To other people, it would be a family and love and whatever like that. And I just thought, I've got to stop doing this, which is to be judgmental, to project my particular view of the world, which is that of a middle-class Londoner, you know, projecting that on them. I've got to shut up. And, you know, if they say something that sticks in my throat, well, that's their business, and I can't judge it. You know, someone picked me up on it, and never forget it. It wasn't about the Up films, but it was about, I wanted to do a John le Carre film because my friend Arthur Hopcroft had written it. And he said, I don't want Apted. I said, he's a neurotic middle-class Englishman, and so am I, and I don't want both of us projecting us. And I thought, oh my God, he's right. And I thought, how dangerous in this material, when people, the joy of this material is the different value systems that people have, you know, and not just reflect my own judgment. So that's what I'm talking about, but it's really horses for courses. I think sometimes you've got to be passionate and vicious and whatever, or whatever, as documentary filmmakers.
Anybody else? Yeah.
You've been quite vocal in the past about the difference in the way directors are treated in the UK and the US, which helped lead to you founding Directors UK. Do you think the situation has improved now, or is there still work to be done?
Well, I think there is work to be done. I mean, they've done very well. It was a long haul. I mean, I was at that time president of the Directors Guild of America, and when I would come here and work here, I was shocked by how frightened people, not just directors, were of management, how frightened people were to ask for simple things like a meal break or something like that. And so, you know, I got a whole group of directors together, film and television, and said, do you know what other people are getting? Not just in America, but in... And anyway, they've got it going, and I think they're doing well. There's a lot to do, and it'll be never ending. I mean, it took the Directors Guild of America 75 years to get where it's got, and these guys have been at it for 4 or 5 years, but they're doing extremely well, I think. And I mean, they have a deal now with the BBC, which gives them certain creative rights, which are, I mean, they've never had them, and directors were much worse treated than actors or writers. It was unbelievable. And also there was no single unit representing them. So I think they're doing very well.
I agree. I think it's been remarkable, the progress that's been made on that in Directors UK. Sorry, right. Can we get you a mic?
This may be an unfair question.
Yes, it is. Oh.
Sorry about that.
Why is it doing that?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
This is really about the crossover between drama and documentary, and it's for both of you. I'm coming to the festival wearing an acting hat as well as a documentary hat, and I've been much preoccupied with the way that acting, even at its very best, is almost conventionalized. You know, there is a kind of way of acting which is very hard not to fall into. And I wonder if you have any ideas about that, and whether that might be something to do with, Michael, your passion for documentary, that it's somehow more authentic. But I'd love Leslie to answer that too.
Well, no, I think it is. I mean, that's the great lesson the Loaches of this world taught us, that, you know, it's not much fun for actors to hear this. Not much fun for me to say only 3 people in Coal Miner's Daughter had ever acted or in the Actors Union. But there's sometimes, you know, to go out on the street and put non-actors with actors can be very challenging for actors. But more important, that I think it helps teach the director, you know, about acting in a way. So he's not just dealing with drama school and all that sort of stuff, but he's, you know, dealing with the raw material, and I found that very helpful. I mean, unless I can't employ an actor because the part is so odd that I can only do it off the street or whatever, I'll always try and use actors for it. But I think I've learned a lot about casting and about working with actors from working with non-actors and working with children and with animals, funnily enough.
Really?
Is that to do with the lack of self-consciousness?
Completely, yes, and the lack of simplicity too. I mean, you know, just to trust the truth of it, to find the truth and just trust it, and don't double-clad it with putting another level on it, which is my version of putting another level on the documentaries, which is my own prejudices and state of mind and all that. Yes, I think it's, you know, the great acting performances, especially on film or television, are the ones that have a raw simplicity to them, I think, that you can cut through all the horseshit and just cut to what we perceive as the truth.
We've probably got time for one, just conceivably 2 questions, right?
There's one down at the front here.
I just wondered, when a participant is expressing doubts about being in the next film, what reasons do you give them to take part?
Well, usually I blackmail them. I mean, my last resort, if they reject every reasonable thing like money and whatever, is to say, you know, we're all in this together. This is something very important. And if people leave it, it weakens it. It truly does. And I think we should stick to it. You know, we've gone so far. I mean, it's really what Susie was saying at the beginning. It's like an old book, you know, I've got kind of... And we've come so far with it. And I always said I'd abandon it only on two issues. One, if enough of them pulled out that it became embarrassing, or if people were no longer interested in seeing it. Well, neither of those 2 things are happening. And that's what I said to them. This is, you know, without being arrogant about it, it is an important jewel in, you know, in British television, and we should all still do it. I mean, and I point to myself and I say, look, I give up my Hollywood life for 9 months or something, to come back and do it, because I think it's so important. And I think they do completely understand it. There was a great moment. They all got together for 49 Up, and I sensed there was kind of a certain pride, even in those who were being difficult about it. And then we learned they were all ringing up to find out what the ratings were. So I knew that we were home there. So that's the call of last resort.
How were the ratings, as a matter of interest?
Here they were excellent.
Right.
On this one, and 49 they were pretty good too. But
I mean, it is interesting. It's impossible to watch any of the Up films, and this one particularly as it gets nearer to my age, without thinking about your own life.
Sure.
I mean, that's the main thing.
The power of it, isn't it?
That is the power of it, yeah. One more. Yeah. Here we are.
Lessons learned. So if you were to do it again, what things would you change?
Well, I mean, it's fun to do that, and particularly when you look, because there are others in the franchise. I mean, obviously, if we were going to do it again, we would know what we were doing. And so when we did, for example, sat down to plot out the Russian one, it was started around the time the Baltic states were seceding from the Soviet Union, and we could see, well, this is the Up film. So we chose the children, and Gemma, who does it, is here tonight too. We chose them geographically. We just said, ponk, 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 all around the Soviet Union. We'll choose a child from each area and see what happens. And when we sat down to do the American one, we thought, what are the big issues? Well, the breakup of the inner cities is a big one, so we picked Chicago. And then, ethnic mobility to get sort of wealthy Hispanics in Los Angeles and blah, 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 and all that sort of stuff. So, I mean, I don't think it's brain surgery to figure it out. It was we were flying by the seat of our pants. So, I mean, now, obviously, if I was going to do it now, there would be a total balance between men and women.
Yeah.
And there would be a much more ethnic balance in the thing,
Well, Britain has changed beyond
and yeah, I mean, it will just try and reflect that, and sexual proclivities would also figure in.
Yeah.
I think it would have a much wider social framework if we were settling down to do it now. But that's why, I mean, we've made mistakes all the time and managed to dodge bullets. But when people yell at me about the women, I mean, as I said, I think that the changing face of women in social society is the biggest revolution in my lifetime. Yeah. And we missed it, not because we were dumb, it was because, those group of people who started this out were not dumb. But it wasn't on the table at the time. And since there was no real thought to go ahead with it into years to come, we never even thought like that. We were just completely kind of captivated by the whole class system and trying to dramatize that.
Well, it served you well, Michael. It certainly continues to be perennially irresistible, and thanks for it. Do you think you're already fairly sure that there will be a 63?
Well, I do my best efforts. If I'm above ground, yes.
Well, I'm sure you'll wheedle them into doing it. Michael Apted, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.